Hello, podcast listeners. We know podcasts are a great way to catch up on a program that you may have missed on KSJE, and it's provided as a free service of this radio station. But you know, KSJE is now listener supported, and so while you enjoy this podcast, we hope that you'll also take some time to join KSJE. Become a member today. It's quite easy to do. Just go to our website at ksje.com/support and pick the level of support that best matches your budget. Thanks again for listening. Here's your podcast.
Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm your host, DelSheree Gladden. I am a USA Today bestselling author and English teacher, and I have an author on the show this week who also writes in multiple genres and has a lot of different projects going on, so I'm excited to talk about all of that. So this week I have Lisa C. Taylor. Lisa, go ahead and introduce yourself and let our readers know who you are and what you're doing.
Thank you very much for having me on the show. I'm Lisa C. Taylor, and I live in Colorado in Memphis, and I am the author of 2 books of short fiction, 3 collections of poetry, and 2 chapbooks of poetry. And I just received a contract for a novel, The Shape of What Remains, which will be out in 2025. I'm also the co-director of the Mesa Verde Writers Conference. We're going into our 2nd year. In fact, we just hired our faculty for this year, and that will be taking place July 11th to 14th in Memphis, Colorado, in beautiful Harmony Barn, which is this gorgeous retreat center. And I also teach online for writers.com, and I am a former professor of creative writing.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. We have a lot to dig into, and you have a wonderful wealth of information in your background of all the different teaching you've done and the groups you're a part of. I'm excited to hear that the Memphis Writing Retreat is happening again. It was one I had looked at and would have loved to have done last year, but it didn't work with my schedule, and we'll see what happens this year. But it sounded amazing, so I will talk a little bit about that at the end, hopefully, if we have time. But yeah, let's dig into what you have going on right now. That's very exciting that you have a new book planned for publishing in 2025. How did that process go? Tell us about where you started with that novel idea and then bringing it through to getting a publishing contract.
The book of short stories, Growing a New Tale, which was published in 2015. I have another one published in 2018, but this particular one, there was a story called Monuments that was about a woman who's had suffered a loss of a child. The short story opens 10 years after that loss, and the novel also opens 10 years after that loss. But I knew when I wrote the short story that this was going to be a much longer story. I just couldn't do it in the short story. So I kept a lot of notes, and I just kept working on it a little at a time. It literally took me nearly 10 years to finish it. And I started sending out queries in August, and I got some bites, and then I got an offer in October that I accepted, so it will be coming out in 2025. It's now a 300 and something page novel. I don't know how that will play out, when it's all edited, how many pages it will be exactly. But it's a story of long grief, which is a topic that is of interest to me. I think our culture does not handle grief very well. And people are kind of saying, you should just get over it, like you can get over it, and particularly the loss of a child. And this is a very unexpected loss, the result of an accident. I became very interested in this. And no, it's not autobiographical. I, thank goodness, have not suffered such a loss, but I'm very interested in it. And I did a lot of research, talking to people who have dealt with situations like this and how other people reacted. It just became of interest to me. And sometimes when I write a short story, I kind of know there's a bigger story behind it. And I'm working on another one right now that will also be a novel that I hope to finish in the next couple of months.
Wonderful. Well, I'm excited to hear about that one when you're ready for that as well. But that's really interesting. Not only is that, I imagine, a really difficult topic to write about, but that process of interviewing people and talking to them about the grief and the experience that they've had, that seems really intimidating in some ways. Tell me how you would approach that.
Well, I didn't do a tremendous amount of it, and it's really an odd and a bit chilling story that while I was probably 2 years in the process of writing this, when my next door neighbor at the time had a daughter who got diagnosed with neuroblastoma, which is a very difficult cancer. She was 6 when she got diagnosed. And in the research for the novel, I found out about different organizations like Compassionate Friends, which is an organization that exists to support parents who have lost children. So I was able to give her mother that information, and ultimately her child did die. I did not know that that was going to happen at the time. We were all rallying for her to make it. She had a bone marrow transplant. Terrible tragedy. So yes, it's difficult, but I also think that people need to talk about it. And in fact, I have stayed in touch with her mother, even though we moved across the country, and I asked her if I could put in my acknowledgments something about her daughter, and she was absolutely thrilled and thought that would be a wonderful thing. So I think people feel like they want to talk about it because there's no forum for talking about it, except maybe something like Compassionate Friends, that we tend to think it's, maybe not polite or you don't want to offend people. But the truth is that people do need to talk about their grief. And my main character, the same, she really needed to talk about her grief, and she really needed to get help navigating it. And even though it's 10 years later, she's still very much mired in it. And I don't think that's unrealistic. I think, everybody's path is different when faced with an unfathomable grief.
Absolutely. And I think that that's something, like you said, like it is difficult to talk about a lot of the time. It's hard to find that venue, maybe that group where it feels appropriate. And so I think that's a great thing to be able to put it into a form like creative writing that lets people know in a packaging that they can kind of take at their own time, see someone else's experience, realize, maybe they're not alone in some of the things that they're experiencing, because there is no one way to grieve. Everybody goes through that in their own way. And that's probably, I would imagine, a difficult thing to fully understand and accept when you're in the middle of it, because if people are giving you advice or you're reading different things about stages or steps or what it should look like, and if it's not exactly your experience, that I imagine can be a really difficult thing added on to what a person is already going through.
Yeah, and I don't want to make it sound like doom and doom. It's really ultimately, I think, a very hopeful novel. There were a lot of difficult moments in it, but I think it ultimately is the story of how a family navigates. And I like to think that I gave hope to people who would be reading it and people who might be going through that. That was definitely my intent. Although I have to say that I never know, and this may be a really weird thing to say, I really never know the outcome of my stories when I write them. The characters come to me and they literally speak to tell their story, even if I dislike some of them, and I do dislike some of them. I felt like I was true to Teresa, who is my main character, and it is really her story. And I tried to be true to her feelings, even if I didn't always agree with the things that she did. So that is my job as a writer, to do that, which is very different than when I write poetry. Whole different mindset.
Now tell me about that, because I've had the opportunity through the show to talk to a lot of poets, but that is not something that I write at all, other than, maybe a few exercises here and there in various classes that I've taken. So that's still something that I'm learning a lot about from talking to people. So tell me about your process for writing poetry, starting a specific poem, and how that differs for you from writing a short story or a novel.
Well, I started my writing life as a poet, and I've actually written since I was 12 years old. And I won a National Scholastic Writing Award in high school and went on and got a degree in English, got a graduate degree in counseling, had a long career in that, and then went back and got an MFA. But I've always been a poet, and I still consider myself a poet because it involves seeing the world through images and metaphors. And that has been really helpful in my fiction as well. I have a support call every Monday from a writer friend who lives across the country. And we were just talking about that today because he's working on a novel too, how being poets first made us into sort of lyrical fiction writers. Writing lyrically just comes second nature to me because my training as a poet. I think it helps you to create more images, more visualization in your writing, use the senses more. So it's a great discipline. It also is a great discipline for being concise, because poems can't have one single wasted word. And everybody, I'm sure listening, and you as well, and me as well, have read novels where you thought, boy, they really could have used a good editor, and that could have been about half the number of pages it is. Just very wordy. And I think starting my discipline as a poet helped me to be concise. And short stories are very concise too. And I've written flash fiction as well. One of the stories, and I think it was Growing a New Tale, won the Hugo House Award, and that was a flash fiction, which is very short fiction, usually under 1,000 words. And it's quite a discipline to tell a whole story that quickly, but still do full character development and, an arc, and, things happen, and it has to be shaped like a story. So I love that idea. I love the idea of having to be concise. And even in my novel, I felt like I really tried to be economical and not have a lot of wordiness, and also to be lyrical, to have description and really sit with the emotions of the characters. To me, and when I taught writing, what I would always say to my students is all writing should make you feel. And if it doesn't make you feel, it's not successful. It doesn't matter what you feel, and it also doesn't matter how it accomplishes that. But isn't that what we read for? To feel something? I mean, we've all read something that just kind of was flat, sort of like seeing a movie and you go, why did I waste my time on that? It just went nowhere for me. So I aspire to write things that are evocative, that will make people feel. That's really, really important to me as a writer, whether it be a poem or a story. And I like to be edgy, too. So that's my other trademark thing, that I'm not afraid to be edgy or write edgy characters that don't always do things that I like. And I do that in poetry as well. I have poetry about homelessness, about people struggling with bad relationships. So poems are not always autobiographical. They're not always my story. I try to also tell other people's stories through poetry or stories. So I think that that's something people sometimes misunderstand and think, oh, well, it must be the poet's life story. But it isn't always. It doesn't have to be. There's no rule about that. And many of us make things up in our poetry, and I'm one of them.
One of my first real experiences with getting into poetry in a class, the professor in that class really drove that point home. She had us read, I believe it was called Papa's Dance. It's completely slipping my mind who wrote that. Do you know?
My Papa's Waltz? Papa's Waltz?
I think that's what it is, yes. It's one I've been wanting to take another look at.
That's a beautiful poem. I love that poem, and I've taught it.
It is. Yeah, it was one that really, I think everybody in the class, it really connected with us. And she kind of brought that up. She's like, how many of you think that this came from the writer's own experiences? And a lot of us were like, man, it's so emotional. There's really a lot there that made you feel like he really saw this scene. And she's like, nope. This was not something he ever experienced. This was something that he came up with from whatever inspiration. And that was always a lesson that really stuck with me. Okay, you don't have to have experienced something to be able to put that level of emotion and connection, that you can use your words in a way that will bring that to the surface for whoever's reading if you take that time and put that attention in. And I love that that is something that you focus on, and that that's an approach that you take to make sure that every word that you're using is going to have the potential to connect and convey that emotion with your reader. I think that is really important.
I do as well. And I think that poem, I used to teach that poem paired with Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden, because they're both poems about fathers who are absolutely less than perfect, where it's sort of bordering on violence, and there might be alcohol, or in the Winter Sundays, it's just poverty, abject poverty. And the father rises early to light the fire, and the children really kind of fear him. And now the end of the poem, which is breathtaking, is basically, what did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? So he comes to the conclusion all these years later that was a kind of love too, that shining the shoes and warming the house with the fire was a kind of love, because men in those days were not demonstrative. It's a beautiful poem, and I think that My Papa's Waltz is similar in that way. It's kind of good, but the guy, I believe, is drunk in the poem, if I'm remembering that correct poem.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a hint of violence in both poems, and this isn't pleasant, but it also is, there's a little bit of loving and playfulness in it. It's interesting, and I love poetry that does that has those kind of contradictions in it, and I try to write them myself. I mean, my latest collection of poetry is called Interrogation of Morning, and it's kind of a mix of lyrical poems. I always try to put one form poem in every collection, and I don't know why. It's just a weird little thing I do. So there's a pantoum in that collection. I really like the pantoum form, and I've done sonnets and other forms as well, but generally I write in free verse. But I just like to kind of stick one in there, see if anyone notices. Maybe they don't.
This is the book that I had a chance to read, Interrogation of Morning. And I really enjoyed the perspectives and the different variety that you had in there. You have some that are very, very short, and others that are a little bit more narrative and let you get a sense of character and story a little bit more. It was fun to see the different topics and everything that you address in it. And I was looking through your catalog of your other books, and you do venture into some themes and ideas and topics that are a little bit more difficult, or things that people are not used to talking about, like homelessness. That's really neat to be able to see such a wide variety coming from one poet, and that you're not afraid to venture into different forms and ideas and just take your writing where you think it needs to go.
Well, thank you. There is kind of a thematic link that happens in collections that kind of organically link. So when I'm putting together a collection with my publisher, lots of things don't make the cut for a variety of reasons. And my particular publisher, because I published these with the 5 books that we're talking about, were published in Ireland as well as the United States. And he doesn't like poetry books to be in sections. I would have kind of preferred this one to be in sections, but he just doesn't like that. It's just not a thing he does. So I had to really think of how each poem could sort of speak to the next poem in a certain way that wouldn't be too jarring. And I don't know whether I accomplished that or not, but I tried.
Well, I think so. Going through it, I didn't feel like there were any sections where I was like, oh, that was a drastic change. But yeah, I thought they went together really well. And there were quite a few that stuck out to me that I really enjoyed. One was the design for the chaotic world. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that one. The title caught my attention right off the bat. Especially lately, it seems like there is just a lot of chaos in the world, and that contradiction of design for the chaotic world. Would you mind, if you're okay with that, talking a little bit about that poem?
Funny you mentioned that poem, because I have a writer friend who looked at this collection, and that was his favorite poem. And I thought, that's a really hard one to be somebody's favorite poem. I thought it was, but he really, really liked it. And I think it's, what I do in that poem is I use the sea as a metaphor for the chaotic world, because under the sea is the ocean area is chaotic. There are a lot of different species, some of which we can't even visualize. So I really like the sound of the word goblin shark. I didn't even know that was a thing. I looked it up and I thought, wow, I got to get that in there. Goblin shark, dragonfish. Where I take it is I kind of take it to the ashes being strewn. When my father died, he wanted his ashes strewn in the ocean, and we did that. So then it becomes also a memorial place. I just feel like we can learn from nature. And I always feel like when we're feeling kind of hopeless with the world, look to nature and look to the order that emerges amid chaos, as it always does. And it seems chaotic and it seems crazy that, some species kill other species. And then we're all living under the sky where a torrential storm can happen, or floods or fires. And we all have to deal with all of that. It held interest for me that could be something to learn from. That's where the title came from. That's where I was going with it, that it was the loss, and it was also that we need to go deep within and look around and really immerse ourselves in the world to learn where to go next.
I like that. Yeah, and I think that's a great point of looking to nature when things are so crazy right now. I mean, multiple wars and political unrest and everything's just, I swear when I read the news, I'm just like, what is going on in our world today? Like, it's really just mind-blowing sometimes to see how much chaos there is in the world at this point. One of the other books that I had read recently was talking about wildfire. In northern New Mexico, we're near places up in Durango. We've had several wildfires, but we're in an area where that's a big danger in our neighboring states and other parts of New Mexico. And I was thinking about that. It kind of came to mind a couple times reading through some of your poems, especially some of the ones like Design for the Chaotic World, where these big events can happen like that. They're destructive and they change the landscape, and it just really disrupts everything for a while. But you go back in a couple years, a decade, and you see everything coming back together and that rebirth. Generally it recovers, and it's just such a traumatic thing, but it's a good reminder that it will keep going. You will get through it. We're going to find a way through the utter chaos that's going on right now.
Yes, and I remember, I think it's in this collection where I had harkening back to going to Hawaii after the volcanic eruption and seeing a flower that was bursting through the dried lava and thinking, that's just kind of a reminder that nature renews. And the end of the poem that you talked about was dive deep to where rare life forms flock, frill, or tentacle, singularity of purpose, a design for the chaotic world. So there's a singularity of purpose of all these rare life forms. And it's just something that can be a reminder for us as the flower that blooms in asphalt or pushes through volcanic eruption is a reminder that nature renews and that things are cyclic. And I have to remind myself that too, because I also can get mired in the chaos. We all can. It's part of what I write. I write sometimes to understand the world better. It helps me to not get so mired in the moment and see a bigger picture, maybe.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a big reason that writing has been such a big part of my life too, trying to work through everything you're feeling and experiencing. It's often hard to sort it all out in your own mind when you're in the middle of it. And and the emotions feel chaotic and the events may be, all over the place. When you can put some of that down on paper and give some of it to other characters away from yourself and have that distance and be able to look at it a little bit more objectively. Not always, but for me at least, put it down on paper, give it some distance, work through it through the character's eyes and experience. It's a very therapeutic process to use writing in that manner. And not always why I or other people write, I'm sure, but it's definitely a great way to try to understand what you're going through or what you're seeing in the world, or even better understand someone else's experience. I think like you were talking about with your friend and the loss of their daughter, that, just because you don't experience it personally, that doesn't mean that it doesn't affect you and that you don't want to understand it and have that compassion for those people who are experiencing it.
Yeah, I think writing can make people more empathetic, and I think we could use more empathy in this world today.
Definitely. I think it's one of those qualities that I think we can always use a little bit more of, especially right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with this is your...
So I have 5 collections of poetry, but 2 of them are chapbooks, which are very short collections.
I wanted to direct people toward where they can find out more about your writing. And you are online. You have your website, lisactaylor.com. So for anyone who wants to learn a little bit more about her current works and keep an eye on the new book that's coming out in 2025, head over there for sure. But what else are you working on? What would you like to share with listeners about your writing and where you're at in your journey of sharing your creativity with everyone else?
Sure. I really try to be out there in the world, even though writing is a solitary thing. So in that light, I do a lot of writers' conferences. I was at the Edmonds Write on the Sound conference, and I will be at the Raymond Carver conference in Port Angeles, Washington in April. For those who are writer nerds, I will be at the AWP, Associated Writing Programs Conference, and that's coming up February 7th through 11th. So I'll be in Kansas City, Missouri in that, so people could find me there. But my website, I have an Amazon author profile, although I really prefer that people buy my books through either their local bookstore where they could be ordered or bookshop.org, which gives money to independent bookstores. It's just a really good way to support small bookstores. And I have a Goodreads profile too. And I'm on every social media, except I'm no longer on Twitter. I'm on Threads. I'd love to hear from my readers. Mesa Verde Writers Conference is very small. For those of you who don't know about it, it's only 26 people. So it fills up really quickly, which we thought the first year, well, maybe it won't. And we had amazingly positive feedback from everybody who attended. We were just overwhelmed with how good the feedback was. And the few tweaks that we made were in response to the evaluations we passed out. Registration is going to open mid-February on the website, www.mesaverdewritersconference.org. You can register through the website, and we have hired 2 new faculty this year. I'll be doing something about secrets and lies, which is something I'm interested in, and how you can use that in writing. So we have quite a variety of stuff, and we will have a panel on Sunday, and it's the bargain of the century. It's very inexpensive and includes all your meals. We use all local people for the food. I think it's pretty unique, and I participate in other conferences, and I got to say we've got something pretty cool with this one. I hope I get to be a part of it for some years to come. And I'm also involved with a new novel now that this novel's already under contract, which working title is Visible Wounds. And it's about a relationship between an ACLU attorney who defends the criminally insane and a social worker for foreign adoption. And they were childhood friends. He's half Vietnamese. And they meet again after like 20 some odd years at the funeral of his mother. His mother and her mother were best friends. That is what I'm working on now. I'm about 200 some odd pages into it, and hopefully I'll get it finished in the next few months. I'm really hoping to.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. I look forward to hearing more about that. And best of luck once you get to the querying process, and I hope it finds a good home that you're happy with.
Yeah, so do I. Really, this one is a little more socially conscious, so I have a particular press in mind for it. I'm hoping I can direct it to that place. So, but I get it done first.
That's always the challenge. That's been my challenge lately, trying to complete a project.
Life is distracting, right?
There's always a lot going on, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Starting the new year, trying to get some writing goals taken care of. And hopefully when I'm on summer break this summer, I will get a lot accomplished.
Yeah, everybody who wants to write, if you can develop a daily habit, even if it's 10 minutes, it really does go a long way. I try to write in the early morning. That's my best time. I'm kind of useless at night. Everybody has their body clock time that works best for them.
True. Yeah, that's something I have been wanting to push myself to establish is a regular writing time and, chip away at it. Even if I don't have a lot of time right now, just get in there, get a little bit done and not let things get away from me for too long. That's a goal I'm working on.
We're all guilty of it. And also carry a notebook with you at all times. I never go anywhere without a small moleskin type notebook so I can jot something down. It's really paid off because I go back to those notes and think, oh, wow, I didn't think of that. I just think you don't want to miss that opportunity when the idea floats in your head,
True. I think just letting those things pass by, it's really easy to do, but you miss a lot. We don't have good enough memories to remember all of those things. At least I know I don't for sure.
Yeah, absolutely true. And just everything's distracting. Everybody works and does other things. Mm-hmm. But I appreciate the time to talk about this. As I said before, I do like hearing from people. If people can connect to my way to reach me through my website, I do love hearing. Oh, I should mention one other thing, which is the Four Corners Writers Group. So we have a Four Corners Writers Group that sort of was born out of a group of writers in this area. This is a pretty rich area for writers and artists who decided to offer something free to anybody. So once a month in Cortez, Colorado, at the Zoo Gallery, ZU Gallery, which is on Main Street in Cortez, it's on the third Wednesday of the month. There's always a speaker, and it's free and welcome to everybody. And we usually get about 25 people. It's a lovely space, and I know this month it'll be on the 17th, and it'll be Scott Graham, who's a novelist, who writes a lot about things that are geographically placed in this area. I don't know I think they're mysteries. So we've had mystery writers, we've had romance writers. I spoke about submissions, how to do submissions. We've got all different topics, mostly what the people want. And sometimes we have a free write, and sometimes we have a share or a reading. So everybody's welcome at 6 to 7:30, the third Wednesday of the month at the Zoo Gallery in Cortez, Colorado. And you can look it up. There has a Facebook group called Four Corners Writers, and you can look it up on Facebook and write a comment and get on the mailing list to find out what's going on with that. So it's just our give back to the community to try and find all the secret writers who would like to meet up with other writers.
It's wonderful. Thank you for mentioning that. I've had my eye on that. It's hard for me to make it during the school year, but I'm hoping I can make it down there for one of the meetings over the summer when life is less crazy. But it sounds fantastic, and I'd love to get a little bit more or something like that going here in this area as well for those who maybe can't make it that far. So I just wanted to remind readers as we wrap up, because we are out of time, that Lisa Taylor's newest book of poetry is called Interrogation of Morning, and she does have several projects on the way in the next few years. So if you are interested in checking out her work and keeping an eye on her future novels and other poetry, find her online on social media, and we also have her website, lisactaylor.com. Lisa, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me, and I really appreciate being able to talk books and writing and everything else with you. This has been wonderful.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was an absolute joy, and I love talking about books and writing because it's my favorite thing. So, and Obviously, it's one of your favorite things too. So thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Did you enjoy that podcast? We hope that you did. And if you did, share it with your friends. And if you really want to keep podcasts like this coming, please support KSJE. You can do it easily online at ksje.com.